This week, a major incident on Ukraine's doorstep with at least 19 Russian drones entering Polish airspace. It's a moment that the Prime Minister Donald Tusk described as the closest that Poland has come to open conflict since World War II. The Defence Ministry in Moscow said it had no plans to attack specific targets, and the Belarusian armed forces blamed electronic jamming for throwing the drones off course. Poland's Foreign Minister Sikorski insisted it defied imagination, though, to call these incursions an accident.
This is a threat not only to Poland. This new technology of the mass use of drones is a threat to all of the EU and NATO, and we need to face it together.
At a moment when the Middle East is once again demanding US attention, President Trump did take some time to communicate his unease. But with several commentators branding this a test of NATO, is he ready to take action? As always, our team are here to answer your questions on that and plenty more.
I'm Vitaly Shevchenko.
I'm Olga Robinson.
And I'm Frank Gardner.
I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to Ukrainecast.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.
We've had so many great questions in from you. Thank you so much for those. But before we get stuck into them, we really do need a recap, Vitaly, on what happened on Wednesday.
Yes, so in the early hours of Wednesday, at least 19 drones crossed into Polish airspace. We believe that they are Russian drones. About 4 of them were shot down. Ukraine and Poland both are saying that this was deliberate. Some drones crossed into Poland via Belarus, and Belarus said that they had lost their way because of electronic warfare. It's interesting what Moscow said and what they didn't deny. The wording of their statements is very precise. They're saying that the defense ministry had no plans to attack targets in Poland, which kind of leaves the possibility open that it was perfectly within their plans to launch unarmed drones into Poland to test Polish defences and to see what sort of response they would get from NATO.
We have had so many questions on this, how we interpret what happened yesterday. So let's get to our first one.
Hello there, this is Daniel from Norwich. Just a quick question regarding the drones that were flown into Polish airspace last night. If for whatever reason these drones continue to fly in the area, whether it be accidentally blown off course or a response test from Russia, at what point could Article 5 be triggered? Thank you very much. Cheers.
Olga, could this have been an accident?
Well, we've been speaking to quite a few experts over the past 24 hours trying to figure out and get their assessment of whether it was an accident or it was a deliberate action. And so far have got a bit of a mixed bag of opinions, because some experts said it's possible that it was part of Russia's hybrid warfare, trying to test Polish defenses and Polish response, as well as NATO countries' response to this incursion. But at the same time, other experts were a bit more cautious, and they said, well, we can't really rule out the possibility of it having been a mistake, because the drones, the visuals that we have got look consistently like Russian decoy drones, or drones that are used very extensively as decoys, and they are not armed, and they have kind of fairly poor or less sophisticated than Shahed's navigational systems, so they can get easily jammed and they can just veer off course.
What's been the NATO response, Frank?
Well, they scrambled both the Polish Air Force, backed up by, so it was Polish F-16s backed up by Dutch F-35s and an Italian airborne reconnaissance plane. So they did scramble, they reacted, but let's break this down. In terms of how well did NATO react? 8 out of 10. How effective was it? 3 out of 10. Because, as Vitaly said, they only managed to shoot down about a quarter of these drones. And this number is tiny compared to the number that are being sent over Ukraine every day. 19 drones. Ukraine gets 500 plus.
We've seen 800 on one occasion.
Exactly, a night. So
And they shoot down almost all of them.
Yeah. So the thing that is glaringly obvious from this is that NATO's eastern border is short on air defence, and that it's going to take a drastic upping of that air defence if they're going to be effective enough against any future Russian drone strikes. This was a test of NATO, probing NATO's eastern borders to see both what it would do politically, was it going to trigger Article 4 or 5, and did they have the kit to stop it?
And where are we at with that response from NATO? What next from NATO, Frank?
So Poland triggered what's called asked to trigger Article 4, which is consultations, which took place, but it didn't trigger Article 5, which would have been considered an attack. This was not considered, NATO decided, an attack on NATO, because nobody was killed, there were no explosions. It was a probing, it was a testing. But I think the Kremlin will be pretty pleased because they've shown that they can penetrate deep into Poland, that they weren't able to stop them. And there will be people in NATO who are saying, well, hang on, this isn't worth going to war over, something like this. It's all about testing the Western alliance.
Among the possible explanations for this incursion, if it was accidental, is also the impact of drone jammers. And that is the subject of our next question.
Hello, Ukrainecast. My name is Scott, and I'm calling in from Alberta, Canada. My question is about future technology. What type of jammers or future tech is being developed to try to counter the drone strikes that are happening in Ukraine right now?
I do constantly see reports, particularly from the front line of jamming, and generally, like all the experts will always speak to, they constantly talk about the importance and the prevalence of technology like this in the areas around the eastern of Ukraine, and just how much they're used. But what I also wanted to say, I think when it comes to the Polish incursion, it's very important to understand that this isn't even like the first time that we've seen Russian drones ending up in Poland or other neighboring countries to Ukraine and Russia. Although this time around, it does seem like more of an issue because it's not a single drone that has been spotted, but it's like multiple ones, more than a dozen.
What kind of jammers are there out there for these drones?
All sorts. It's an endless game of cat and mouse. The drones get better, the jammers get better. This morning I read a post by a Ukrainian drone expert, goes by the name of Flash, and he found something called controlled reception pattern antennae in Russian drones, apparently Chinese made, and these antennae, they are designed to resist jamming. So technology develops every week, every month, and one way around jamming is to use fiber optic cables physically attached to the drone and connecting the drone to the operator. But obviously you can't fly them for hundreds of miles if we were to believe that Russia launched drones at Poland.
So many of the questions that you've sent into us have been about escalation. And that's obviously the concern, and it's something that we've touched on already. But most of you are wondering what that could constitute. So let's talk a little bit more about that now. And we have one of our youngest Ukraine casters, Leo, who is 16, and he says, what would European and American escalation look like? And how would it affect the Ukrainian war effort? Frank?
So escalation, good question, Leo. Escalation is the kind of ghost that has hung over this entire war since the full-scale invasion in February 22, because it's the one thing that the US particularly, but also a number of European countries are really scared of. They have tried to give Ukraine as much help as they can, but without getting drawn into an escalatory battle with Russia. So Russia has the upper hand here. Why? Because there's something called the escalatory ladder. So if you imagine the lower rungs of it is conventional fighting. The top rungs is full-scale exchange of nuclear missiles, obliteration of cities, end of days. The middle rungs are something that most Western countries don't have, but Russia does have, and that's tactical nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear bombs. The difference is a strategic nuclear weapon wipes out a city, goodbye, Manchester, Moscow, whatever. But a tactical nuclear bomb will take out something the size of a theatre hall, of a small village, an armoured formation in the field. It'll generate some radioactive plumes, some fallout. It'll obliterate everything within a small area. But it's not an end of days thing. So we don't have the ability to escalate, we the West, at the moment to that level, but Russia does. And Russia's what's called ORBAT, its order of battle, it includes the use of tactical weapons. And there was a real fear earlier on in this war when Russia was losing. It lost Kherson and the area around Kharkiv, and it looked as if they were possibly on the brink of collapse. There was a real fear in Western capitals that Russia was going to lash out in as a last resort with tactical nuclear weapons. And it was made very clear to it that by the West, if you do that, then you are going to bring the West in and we will obliterate your conventional army in Ukraine.
For Moscow, anything the West does to help Ukraine is an escalation or an effort to prolong the war.
Because, Frank, surely more immediately, what about just escalatory action being the Europeans giving Ukraine some more weapons or some more help or contributing more?
That is exactly what Moscow has said all along. So it's referred to as nuclear saber rattling. So it's happened many times. You know, if you give Ukraine main battle tanks, we will consider that an act of aggression. If you give them F-16s, etc. And so far, the West has called Putin's bluff on this one, and he has not escalated to anything.
And Russia doesn't exactly need to be provoked by any sort of escalation. It has consistently been escalating its own attacks, testing Ukraine's defences and Western responses as well. So at this stage, it's a question of what exactly the West, i.e. Europe and America, are prepared to do to help Ukraine. What sort of weaponry are they prepared to give Ukraine? And this is where the problem is. There's been a lot of reluctance to give Ukraine more.
The Kremlin will have some red lines here. And if there were to be a serious Ukrainian long-range missile attack that, for example, did some serious damage to the Kremlin, that would be considered a massive escalation.
Which do you think Zelensky could be considering after the attack in Kyiv, in the heart of Kyiv and government buildings?
It's possible that in turn was an escalation. So every time somebody attacks something of greater significance, it is considered to be an escalation.
Leo, thank you for your question. Great to have some teenage listeners to Ukrainecast as well. I have teenagers at home. I'll be making sure I mention to them that Leo has sent in a question. But from Leo to Leon, who has emailed us from the Netherlands with a question about possible financial repercussions. He says, in regards to use of frozen Russian assets for the direct support of Ukraine in this war, how advanced are the discussions on this matter within the EU and the G7? What obstacles still exist, legal, financial, or even diplomatic, Vitaly?
Not very advanced. At the start of the full-scale invasion, Russia had about $300 billion worth of assets in the West, which were frozen because of the invasion. Frozen means they still legally belong to Russia, but nobody can do anything with them. Russia can't withdraw them, can't move them. And what the West has been doing is using profits from those assets to help Ukraine, but not the actual Russian money. That is what Kyiv has been asking for. Give us those $300 billion. But the argument put forward against this by various financial institutions is that this would severely undermine their credibility, their status, their function as a keeper of somebody else's money. That's why, even though there've been plenty of suggestions that Russian money is seized and handed over to Ukraine, essentially this has been knocked down the road endlessly.
Yeah, and that was a point made by Stephanie Baker, who joined us on Tuesday's episode of Ukrainecast to talk all things sanctions. She made that exact point, didn't she, Vitaly? European governments may increasingly struggle to keep asking their taxpayers to fund Ukraine when frozen Russian assets continue to sit there. Just echoing what you've just said. So do go back and listen to Tuesday's episode if you want more on all things sanctions. But let's turn now to another question from Mark, who says, I watch endless accounts from podcasters about the extensive damage being done to Russia by Ukraine. For example, it said that maybe 29%, I think it is actually around 20%, of Russian oil refining has been destroyed. Numerous bridges brought down over roads and railway lines so that the Russian army cannot be resupplied. Numerous ammunition dumps and trains, convoys destroyed. Now, all of this is either disinformation by Ukraine or it is at least partially true. Why is none of it reported in the media at any time that I can recall? We'll come to you on this, Olga, but firstly, I should also say we do actually report on this, but your answer for Mark.
I was just going to say, because if you check out our live page on the BBC website from BBC Verify, we literally report pretty much every single day about something related to overnight strikes by supposedly Ukrainian drones on railway infrastructure, on oil refineries. And there's been a massive spate of attacks on oil refineries that we have seen that happened in August. And I mean, at one point, it was so intense that some of my colleagues were literally messaging in our work chat saying, this and this refinery has been hit again. And yes, it's definitely the same refinery, and hit again, the footage is new, because we just got used to the same names being used so many times. It's much more difficult, though, to assess the impact of individual strikes, because we often don't have kind of reliable data. Sometimes you don't get satellite imagery to analyze it. With things like refineries, it's really difficult to get a sense of how the damage will affect the operation of the refinery, and we kind of rely just on media reports, and they don't always come through immediately. So there's definitely reporting, and there's definitely going on. So I wouldn't quite a few attacks going on a regular basis. So I wouldn't definitely describe it as disinformation.
And they're definitely working, because Russia's banned petrol exports. A country which has so much oil and used to have so much refining capacity, now we can't export petrol.
That's a good point. And Vitaly, this is a question for you, and I think it really piqued our interest when we got this question in on the mechanics of wartime politics from Peter.
Hello, Ukrainecast. This is Peter from Epsom in the UK, a long-time listener since episode 1. My question is, over the years there has been a constant stream of Western leaders and politicians travelling to Kyiv and other regions of Ukraine. Apparently they normally travel into the country by train, and with the Russians seemingly happy to attack anything that moves, is the Kremlin advised of these visits in advance to prevent any possible accidental attack on the train and the escalation that would undoubtedly cause? Keep up the good work, and thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, they travel by train because there's no civilian air traffic above Ukraine, because Russia can shoot down those planes. So both foreign visitors and President Zelensky himself, they use trains, passenger trains, blue-coloured with yellow stripes. They don't look any different from all the other trains in Ukraine. I would be amazed.
Particularly if you're in the air as well.
Yeah. I would be amazed if any of those Western leaders give advance warning to Russia and ask Russia not to hit them. I just don't think there are channels like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Frank.
I don't think so.
If they hit one train that carries a foreign leader, or even Zelensky, that's such an awful escalation that even Russia would probably be reluctant to take the risk of.
Frank, presumably when dignitaries or leaders come to Ukraine, though, it is very last minute.
Yeah, I mean, there's inevitably a high degree of OPSEC, of operational security about this, because they don't want it known in advance exactly where they're going. So when I was in Kyiv earlier this summer, in the summer, we had a surprise sudden visit from UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, French President Macron, Chancellor Merz, and Donald Tusk from Poland. And they all arrived, at least 3 of them arrived on the train together. So the French, the German, sounds like a joke, this, doesn't it? You know, a kind of pub joke. But, a French, a German, and a British leader are all on the train. And they all got out together. They were greeted. And there were lots of TV. It was TV gold. They were pictured together outside a cathedral, walking slowly across the cobbles together with President Zelensky. It's a big TV moment, and part of it is for that reason. The whole idea is to present a united front. They then phoned Donald Trump from Zelensky's office. If you remember, he was given an ultimatum. That was on the Saturday. By Monday, Putin had to agree to a ceasefire. And he was able to dodge that by saying, I've got a better idea. Let's have a summit, which he didn't turn up to in Turkey.
There's also something so evocative about leaders arriving by train, Vitaly. We're used to seeing them walk down the steps of a plane, but arriving into the middle of Kyiv at a train station and stepping out of
optics of it, they're so unusual. In happier times, this isn't what Kyiv railway station was about. It was a bustling hive of activity where villagers would bring in their berries and potatoes to sell in the local markets, and it was very down to earth, very democratic, very peoply, And I used to travel to Zaporizhia from Kyiv every month, and it was the last place I would expect to see the world's high and mighty, and to see them disembark from those very familiar blue and yellow trains in Kyiv. It was like, oh my God, this is so unusual. This isn't normal at all.
And also, Ukrainian social media users there are so many jokes that you see from time to time about these visits. In particular, I remember a few months ago when Steve Witkoff was visiting, people were joking that, there are now that he's visiting and staying in Kyiv, there are no strikes overnight from Russia into Ukraine, and maybe he should stay for longer or come more often, because he seems to be like the best air defense for Ukraine.
Ukraine's best air defences, Steve Witkoff.
They say the same, actually, about General Keith Kellogg, who's the sort of ex-military envoy for Ukraine, who's known as the patron saint of Kyiv, because Kyiv doesn't get bombed when he's in town.
Let's finish with a question on a topic that we haven't actually covered for a while, and perhaps it might have been inspired by those pictures that we saw last week of Vladimir Putin alongside various leaders in Beijing, including the elusive North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Hello, Ukrainecast. This is Bernadette from London. Thank you for your continued work. I wanted to know if there is any news about the fate of the captured North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. Also, why have Ukraine's allies not been more insistent that this is a red line crossed, and to highlight the hypocrisy of Putin's objections to NATO peacekeeping troops being deployed in the region? Thank you.
Vitaly, I thought North Korean troops were almost exclusively deployed on Russian soil only.
Yes, to Kursk. That's all we know. In January this year, 2 of them were captured by Ukraine, and as far as we know, they're still there. When it comes to red lines, well, yes, this is what the West can argue, that this is a red line, an escalation, what have you. But what will the West do? There have been so many red lines, they've been crossed, red lines put forward by both Russia and the West, and well, nothing happened.
Yeah, there's definitely been, just to continue Vitaly's point, there's definitely been speculation about them being deployed in eastern Ukraine, but there has been no verifiable footage or evidence of them actually being present, whereas we've consistently seen the majority of footage or visuals coming out that feature North Koreans were actually indeed from Kursk, because they were trying to help the Russians kind of stave off Ukrainian incursion, as they held quite a lot of territory for a long time. But we haven't actually, when it comes to the question of what happened to the captured North Koreans, we haven't really been getting that many reports about it at all. And last time I checked, it was a few months ago that was the last kind of reporting in the media about them. So we don't really know that much about what happened to them and where they're at now.
Thanks so much for watching this edition of Ukrainecast. We'll have another Q&A episode for you next week as well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.